Empires don't last forever. Some collapse in war, others rot from within. This is the final chapter of a story nearly a century in the making, a story of power, paranoia, and an empire at war with itself. Throughout history, empires have risen and fallen. From the mighty legions of Rome to the colonial fleets of the British Empire, humanity's story is stitched together by the ambitions of nations, rising to dominance, only to fall victim to the same forces that once gave them power. They built roads, cities, ideologies, and they left ruins, resentment, and lessons written in stone. And then came a new kind of empire, one built not on kings or emperors, but on ideas, liberty, democracy, free enterprise. The United States of America, born in rebellion, forged in revolution, empowered by industry, innovation, and global ambition. For over a century, it expanded its reach, economically, militarily, and culturally. It shaped the modern world, from Coca-Cola to the internet, from Hollywood to the global financial system. But with every empire comes a tipping point. Some call it a transformation, others a fall. Power is shifting, the world is changing, and for the first time in a century, America faces the question once reserved for the fallen empires of the past. What happens when the empire that promised forever begins to show signs of collapse? At the dawn of the 19th century, America was still young, but it was hungry. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase doubled the size of the republic overnight, giving the U.S. control of the Mississippi River and an endless frontier to the west. This wasn't just expansion. It was destiny, manifest destiny. The belief that it was America's divine right, no, its obligation, to stretch across the continent. But this ambition came at a cost. Indigenous nations were pushed aside, treaties were broken, lives were lost, entire cultures erased. By 1848, after war with Mexico, the United States had annexed Texas, California, and the Southwest. From Atlantic to Pacific, the empire within was complete. Empires are built not only by land, but by engines. Between 1820 and 1890, the American economy exploded. Fueled by coal, driven by steel, and connected by railroads, cities grew from outposts into industrial giants. In the East, textile mills churned day and night. In the Midwest, grain and livestock fed the world. In the West, gold, silver, and timber brought fortune and violence alike. Millions arrived from Europe, Irish, Italians, Germans, Jews, each seeking a new life and powering the industrial engine with their labor. The foundations of an empire had shifted, not just territory, but production, innovation, and scale. But empires often carry contradictions, and America's was built on a fatal one: slavery. In a mighty one, the fighting republic turned on itself. Brother fought brother in a conflict that would claim over 600,000 lives. The Civil War wasn't just about secession, it was about the soul of the empire. Would it be a democracy for all, or a plantation aristocracy for some? With the Union's victory, slavery was abolished. The Constitution was amended, and for a brief moment, a more inclusive empire seemed possible. Visual Freedmen's Bureau schools, then cuts to segregation signs, Klan activity. But that moment faded. Reconstruction was met with resistance. The dream of a multiracial democracy gave way to Jim Crow. The foundation had survived, but it remained cracked. As the 19th century progressed, America entered what Mark Twain called the Gilded Age, shiny on the outside, rotten underneath. Men like John D. Rockefeller, Andrew Carnegie, and J.P. Morgan became titans of industry. Their wealth rivaled kings. Their influence bent governments. The economy boomed, but inequality soared. Immigrant workers faced brutal hours. Unions rose and were crushed. Behind the glamour of a rising empire was a machine fueled by exploitation, both at home and soon abroad. By the 1890s, America's ambition could no longer be contained within its borders. Trade routes, coaling stations, military bases, the logic of empire was irresistible. In 1867, the U.S. bought Alaska from Russia. In 1893, it overthrew the Hawaiian monarchy to secure the islands for American business and naval power. The Pacific was no longer a barrier, it was a highway. And with growing interest in the Philippines, Cuba, and Latin America, America's age of global intervention was about to begin. From revolution to reconstruction, from railroads to robber barons, the foundations were set. By 1898, the United States stood at the edge of a new century and a new identity. No longer a regional power, no longer a continental republic. Now a global actor, armed with industry, ideology, and ambition. Empires often begin with a war, brief, brutal, and justified by idealism. In 1898, the United States declared war on Spain, ostensibly to free Cuba from tyranny. But what followed wasn't liberation, it was expansion. The U.S. seized Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Philippines. It annexed Hawaii. The American flag now flew from the Caribbean to the Pacific. And a new chapter began. America, no longer just a republic, but a rising global power. The new century came with old justifications. American politicians, inspired by British colonialism, spoke of civilization, progress, and paternal duty. It was called the white man's burden, the belief that Anglo-Saxon nations were destined to uplift the uncivilized. It cloaked conquest in morality, but in the Philippines, that burden meant war, torture, and thousands of civilian deaths. America's imperial face, smiling in public, clenched behind closed doors. Power is not just about armies, it's about money. In Latin America, the United States practiced what it called dollar diplomacy. American banks funded governments, and when those governments faltered, Marines followed. In Nicaragua, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, U.S. forces landed again and again to protect corporate interests and stability. And then the crown jewel, the Panama Canal. Built through political manipulation and grueling labor, the canal gave the U.S. control over global trade routes. The empire was now a commercial colossus, with battleships to back its balance sheets. In 1914, Europe exploded. The Great War consumed the old empires of Britain, Germany, Russia, and Austria-Hungary. At first, America watched. Then it joined. In 1917, the U.S. entered World War I, and with it, the stage of global conflict. Over 2 million Americans served in France, 100,000 died. And when it ended, Woodrow Wilson proclaimed a new world order, based not on conquest, but on peace and democracy. But the U.S. Senate refused the League of Nations. America had awakened to global power and immediately recoiled from it. The empire, unsure of itself, returned to isolation. The 1920s brought roaring growth, wealth, and excess. American culture spread like wildfire: music, movies, machines. New York eclipsed London as the world's financial heart. The dollar became king. But beneath the shine lay shadows. Farmers went bankrupt. Inequality widened. Speculation ran rampant. And then in 1929, the crash. Wall Street fell. Banks collapsed. And the empire faced its first great internal test. The 1930s saw the empire in retreat, internally focused, externally cautious. Franklin D. Roosevelt reshaped government, rebuilt confidence, and redefined the relationship between citizens and the state. But abroad, the world was burning. Fascism surged in Germany and Italy. Imperial Japan invaded Manchuria. The League of Nations was impotent. America watched and waited. Still wounded by World War I, it refused to lead. But history was not finished with the American empire. In 1941, the world came knocking. On December 7th, the Japanese bombed Pearl Harbor. The sleeping giant awoke, furious and unstoppable. The U.S. mobilized its vast industrial might. It built planes, ships, tanks, outproducing all others. It sent 16 million Americans to war across Europe, Africa, and Asia. By 1945, the Nazi regime had fallen. Japan lay in ruins, and it was the United States that had dropped the bomb. Not once, but twice. The message was clear. This was now America's world. By the end of World War II, America's transformation was complete. Its military unmatched, its economy booming, its culture and currency ascendant. It had become the architect of the post-war world, the founder of the United Nations, the guardian of Europe, the counterbalance to Soviet power. The American empire was no longer in the making. It was here. And for the first time in history, one nation held the fate of the world in its hands. The United States had become something new. Not just a republic, not just a victor. It was now the dominant force on Earth. Welcome to the age of American hegemony. The U.S. didn't just win the war, it built the peace. At Bretton Woods, it anchored global finance to the dollar. At the United Nations, it helped design a new diplomacy. Through the Marshall Plan, it rebuilt Western Europe with nearly $13 billion in aid. While the Soviets spread ideology, America spread infrastructure, capital, culture, stability. This wasn't just generosity, it was strategy, an empire of influence, not colonies. The Soviet Union, under Stalin, extended its grip over Eastern Europe. Communist parties rose in Greece, Turkey, China. President Truman drew a line in the sand. In 1948, he declared that America would support any nation resisting communism, economically, politically, militarily. It became known as the Truman Doctrine, and it would define American foreign policy for the next half-century. In 1950, war came to the Korean Peninsula. North Korea, backed by the Soviets and China, invaded the South. The U.S., under a United Nations banner, intervened, sending hundreds of thousands of troops. The war ended in stalemate. The peninsula was divided, but the message was sent. America would fight to contain communism, anywhere, at any cost. After Korea, the American empire changed shape. It was no longer defined by territory, but by presence. By the 1960s, the U.S. had over 700 military installations around the world. Its Navy ruled every ocean. Its bombers could strike any city in minutes. Nuclear weapons guaranteed it. Mutually assured destruction protected it. The American empire now existed everywhere and nowhere. But not all battles were fought with soldiers. The Cold War was also a shadow war, fought with spies, coups, and secrets. In 1953, the CIA overthrew Iran's elected leader. In 1954, Guatemala. In the 60s and 70s, Congo, Chile, Laos. Each time the motive was the same: protect American interests, prevent communism, maintain control. The empire wasn't just defending freedom, it was engineering it. Then came Vietnam. What began as a small advisory mission turned into a quagmire that would scar a generation. Over 58,000 Americans died. Millions of Vietnamese civilians were killed. And for the first time, America lost. The myth of American invincibility cracked. Trust in government evaporated. And the question was whispered in halls of power: had the empire overreached? While bombs and battles shaped geopolitics, culture shaped hearts and minds. Jazz, rock and roll, jeans, Coca-Cola, Hollywood, American culture swept the globe. Even in countries that feared its power, they craved its music, its dreams, its symbols. This was a different kind of empire, one built not on conquest, but desire. By the 1980s, the Cold War was reaching its climax. Ronald Reagan escalated tensions, calling the Soviet Union an evil empire and proposing the Strategic Defense Initiative. The USSR, burdened by war in Afghanistan and economic decay, began to crack. Protests spread. Gorbachev called for reforms. And then, in 1989, the Berlin Wall fell. In 1991, the Soviet Union collapsed. The Cold War ended. And for the first time in modern history, there was only one superpower. The United States stood alone, unmatched in might, wealth, and reach. What Rome once dreamed of, America had achieved. September 11th, 2001. A date etched into the American psyche, the illusion of invincibility shattered. 19 men armed with box cutters changed the course of history. The towers fell, 3,000 people died, the nation mourned, then raged. The war on terror had begun. The first target, Afghanistan. The Taliban had given refuge to Al-Qaeda. Within weeks, American forces were on the ground. The regime fell quickly, but bin Laden vanished. The mission shifted from capture to nation building. And like empires before it, America became stuck. Year after year, president after president, the war dragged on. In 2003, the Bush administration turned to Iraq. They claimed Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. The truth, he didn't. But that didn't matter. The war was on. The US invaded. Baghdad fell in weeks. But once again, victory was an illusion. Insurgency, civil war, sectarian chaos. Thousands of American lives, hundreds of thousands of Iraqi lives. All for a war built on a lie. As the wars dragged on, tactics changed. America turned to the shadows. Drones replaced boots, airstrikes from invisible machines, often without warning. Hundreds of civilians died in signature strikes, based on patterns, not identities. Detention without trial, torture. The moral high ground disappeared beneath muddy boots. The war didn't just consume lives abroad, it consumed lives at home. Over 7,000 American troops killed, over 30,000 veterans lost to suicide. $8 trillion spent across 20 years. A generation born after 9/11, fighting a war they didn't start. What was it all for? Democracy didn't bloom. Terror didn't end. The enemies changed names, but the war never did. After 9/11, fear transformed America. The Patriot Act gave government sweeping powers. The NSA built a vast apparatus to monitor everything: calls, emails, locations. Whistleblower Edward Snowden revealed the truth in 2013. Everyone was being watched. The cost of security was liberty. While America fought in deserts, new rivals rose. China became an economic juggernaut. Russia clawed back influence. Iran spread its reach across the Middle East. The world was changing, but America was stuck in the past. Fighting yesterday's wars, missing tomorrow's threats. The endless war didn't just weaken America abroad, it hollowed it out at home. Trillions spent overseas while schools, roads, and hospitals crumbled. The 2008 crash shattered faith in the system. Inequality soared. Trust in institutions collapsed. The empire was bleeding, not from battle, but from within. By the end of the 2010s, the writing was on the wall. The Islamic State rose from the ashes of Iraq. The Taliban gained strength in Afghanistan. America's longest war was ending, not in victory, but retreat. Into one, the final helicopter left Kabul. And just like that, the empire's illusion crumbled. Not with a bang, not with a headline, but with silence. For 30 years, America tried to rule the world, to bend history toward its will, to chase safety through supremacy. But empires don't fall all at once. They erode, slowly, quietly, until the world looks up and sees that the sun has set. History doesn't always end with a bang. Sometimes it decays. At the dawn of the 2020s, the American empire entered a new phase, not defined by expansion, but by uncertainty. An invisible virus shattered the illusion of control. Political chaos fractured the very idea of unity, and across the globe, rivals rose, while America stumbled. This is not just a new chapter, it's a different book. In early 2020, a virus spread silently across the planet. COVID-19 would infect every continent, shut down global economies, and expose just how fragile modern civilization had become. In the United States, nearly 1.1 million lives were lost. Hospitals overflowed, supply chains broke, families were locked in their homes while panic set in. The world's most powerful empire, paralyzed by an invisible enemy. And as Americans argued over masks, mandates, and misinformation, the virus wasn't the only thing mutating, so was the nation itself. Locked indoors, America turned to screens. But instead of connection, it found division. Algorithms rewarded outrage. Platforms radicalized millions in silence. Entire populations began living in alternate realities, each convinced the other was insane. Every institution, from media to medicine, was now suspect. Conspiracies thrived. Trust died. The empire was still standing, but its people were no longer sure what was real. On January 6, 2021, America saw something it hadn't witnessed in over 2 centuries, a direct assault on its own seat of power. Fueled by allegations of a stolen election, a mob stormed the Capitol. Some came with zip ties, others with body armor. Some believed they were saving democracy, others came to end it. This wasn't a protest, it was a symptom of a democracy in decay, of a republic cracking under the weight of myth. In August 2021, the war that had defined a generation ended. But it ended not with ceremony, but collapse. The Afghan government crumbled in days. The Taliban returned, stronger than ever. American-trained soldiers vanished. Billions in weapons left behind. 2 decades of sacrifice erased in a weekend. And as desperate Afghans clung to departing aircraft, the world saw the cost of empire: abandonment, failure, silence. 6 months later, the illusion shattered again. Russia invaded Ukraine. Tanks rolled across the border. Cities were bombed. Civilians were massacred. And war returned to Europe for the first time in decades. America responded, not with troops, but with billions in weapons and aid, sanctions, propaganda wars. And yet the world began to shift. The West wasn't so united anymore. Countries hedged, others defected. And the US, once unquestioned, now faced a divided global order. As America fought in the Middle East, another empire was building, quietly, strategically, relentlessly. China. Through infrastructure, influence, and innovation, Beijing expanded its reach. The Belt and Road, the digital yuan, TikTok, rare earths, EVs, AI. Power wasn't just military anymore. It was algorithmic, economic, cultural. And as BRICS expanded, inviting nations tired of Western dominance, a new pole emerged. Not anti-America, just post-America. Back home, the war never stopped. It just turned inward. Woke versus anti-woke, red versus blue, facts versus feelings. Every subject, climate, gender, race, tech, truth, became a battlefield. Every citizen, a soldier. The culture war became the only war. But while Americans fought over bathrooms and hashtags, the real shifts were happening elsewhere. Meanwhile, the future arrived, fast and furious. Artificial intelligence exploded onto the scene. Jobs vanished. Reality blurred. Truth became editable. And the climate struck back. 2023 was the hottest year on record. Cities burned, crops failed, coastal towns flooded. America, once the architect of the future, now seemed unprepared for it. In this age of uncertainty, the greatest crisis may not be military, or viral, or even economic. It's psychological. The empire has lost faith in itself. Its young no longer believe in the American dream. Its old mourn a country that no longer exists. Its politicians speak in slogans. Its people scream into phones. And somewhere beneath it all, a quiet question grows louder. What if this is the end? No empire lasts forever, but not all collapse in fire. Some fade into something new. The story of the American empire is not just about dominance. It's about reinvention. The old world is gone. The future is unwritten. What comes next is up to us. The era of uncertainty has begun. The world is shifting beneath our feet, and whether this empire falls or transforms, one thing is clear: the future won't look like the past. Thanks for watching this final chapter in our series. If this resonated with you, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Drop your thoughts in the comments below.